I hope you had a chance to listen to the keynote because in the keynote, I laid a foundation for what I want to talk about in this presentation. In the keynote, I gave the why, and now I want to talk more about the how. But before I get started, you may be wondering where I'm coming up with what I'm telling you. So let me briefly tell you my story. This is my family. You can see we specialize in girls. My husband, Brent, and I have raised 8 daughters and 1 son. One of the 2 rare man children in our family ran off just before this picture was taken. And by the way, we have 2 more girls arriving this summer. I've always been restless where education's concerned, so we public schooled, private schooled, charter schooled, homeschooled, unschooled, online schooled, and did combinations of all of the above. By current educational standards, you might say we were a success. All 9 of our children have graduated from universities, with several of them earning higher degrees. We're proud of their hard work, but I always felt like something was missing. Several years ago, as our youngest was getting ready to leave home, I got involved in a project that made me seriously look at the question, what is the purpose of education? I had read a study where 365 people were asked what they thought the purpose of education was, and they received 365 different answers. Isn't that interesting that we're trying to find a one-size-fits-all model of education when we can't even agree on the why? What I wanted to know was, what is God's view? What is His purpose for education? And what are His methods? I spent the next year or so in intense study, starting with 16 volumes of the teachings of the prophets, as well as the 4 standard works. They became my measuring stick for truth, as I then started studying various educational philosophies out there. I took hundreds of pages of notes, and all those words distilled down to 2 simple essences. I have come to believe that God's purpose for education is to prepare children to live lives of maximum joy. Does He not teach us man is that he might have joy? Did we not shout for joy? Would His purpose for education be separated from the highest He hopes for us to achieve? A career may certainly be part of that path, but I don't see it as the ultimate objective. And His method can be summed up in a simple phrase I found in Charlotte Mason's writings. True education is between a child's soul and God. He reserves to Himself the role of teacher. When we read, "And all our children should be taught of the Lord," I don't think it just means about the Lord. I read that the day will come when all our children shall be taught by the Lord. So in my mind, it shifts our role as the disseminator of knowledge, something even a machine can do, to that of an artist, preparing the hearts of our children to be taught by Him, which is what I talked about in the keynote. But how do we do that? As part of my search, I was led to a wonderful circle of educators who I call the Heart Educators. They've become some of my dearest friends. It's a minor detail that they all happen to be dead. It's through their writings, which have only recently surfaced again, that I feel surrounded by them, and they teach me something new every single day. I've been gathering and sorting and sharing their writings through my website, Libraries of Hope, where you'll find, among many things, a Mother's University. Mothers are joining with other mothers in Mothers of Influence groups to learn how to use the arts to cultivate hearts. It's all free, and you can learn more at welleducatedheart.com and mothersofinfluence.org. As I continued to learn, a simple pattern for learning emerged. Today's schools are very much focused on training the minds of our children. You know you're in the realm of the mind when what you're teaching can be measured and tested. What is 9 times 9? Who was the first president of the United States? The mind is fed with facts and information. We associate the mind with the realm of science, which is all about discovering the laws, rules, and principles upon which everything in the universe functions. So we teach our children the rules of spelling, the rules of grammar, the laws of thermodynamics. Rules and laws create order. They are good and desirable. Learning for the mind is systematic and sequential. You need to know arithmetic before you can study algebra. But the big challenge of this kind of learning is it's very hard to hold on to by itself. We test kids on Friday, and by Monday, a lot of what they learned is gone. We call this kind of learning academic learning. Have you ever looked up the word academic? I did. Some of you know this. The dictionary says, having no practical importance, not involving or relating to anything real or practical, having no practical or useful significance. And we don't just want academic learning, we want rigorous academics. Rigorous and rigor mortis have the same root word rigor, which means stiff and rigid, even voluntary submission to pain. Over 2,000 years ago, Aristotle understood something we seem to have forgotten. Educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. Learning in the heart cannot be measured or tested. Lessons are delivered through feelings and impressions and through the imagination. Love is the foundation of all lasting and meaningful learning. This kind of teaching requires the use of the arts that reach deeply into the heart where words alone cannot travel. Yesterday I talked about these languages of the heart which stir our souls and awaken desire. This stage of learning can be spontaneous and random because it goes into long-term storage. So we have the luxury of time to connect and make use of it. By the way, we can prolong the lifespan of facts and information by attaching them to a language of the heart. For example, we're able to hold on to 26 letters of an alphabet in a certain order because we attach them to a song. What does that tell you you can do to help doctrines and principles stick? And now the third and most important and most neglected part of the pattern for learning, the role of the Spirit, which comes to us through light or a sort of spiritual sunshine. The source of this light is Jesus Christ. I believe Parley Pratt sums up the role of the Spirit very nicely. This light quickens all the intellectual faculties, increases, enlarges, expands, and purifies all the natural passions and affections, and adapts them by the gift of wisdom to their lawful use. It inspires, develops, cultivates, and matures all the fine-toned sympathies, joys, tastes, kindred feelings, and affections of our nature. It inspires virtue, kindness, goodness, tenderness, gentleness, and charity. It develops beauty of person, form, and features. It tends to health, vigor, animation, and social feeling. It invigorates all the faculties of the physical and intellectual man. It strengthens and gives tone to the nerves. In short, it is, as it were, marrow to the bone, joy to the heart, light to the eyes, music to the ears, and life to the whole being. No wonder the Lord is so anxious that we receive the Spirit into our lives. The Spirit operates in the realm of faith because we cannot tangibly see or touch it. We can only sense its presence. The Spirit is all about creation, fitting a right use or righteousness to all our learning for the purpose of increasing love, beauty, joy, goodness, and truth in the world, all the riches of eternity. Our learning needs an expressive outlet, an application. The difference between the beautiful Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea is the Dead Sea has no outlet. When we start piling up learning for which there is no use, the learning starts stagnating inside of us and deadens us. Like Mr. Rogers taught, it is not what you possess, but what you do with what you possess that really matters. The world was not created from nothing. The Lord went to where there was matter unorganized and organized it. The biggest obstacle to the work of the Spirit in our lives is we give it so little to work with. To use a relatable visual, are we bringing this or this to the table? What are our questions, our interests? What are we bringing from our own studies? As we fill our hearts with all that is good and true and beautiful, and then align ourselves with correct principles and laws, the spirits can do much with our lives and put our learning to good use. Michelangelo filled his heart and labored hard to master important skills, but he acknowledged that his unassisted heart was barren clay. He recognized the necessity of divine influence on his works. Heaven is anxious to help us as we learn and can fill in gaps and help make sense of our learning. For example, I was at a large book sale, and out of all the hundreds and thousands of books laid out on a table, I felt drawn to a book about Greece. In it, I learned about the poet Pindar, who I'd never heard of before, and how scholars credit his influence with ushering in the golden age of Greece, which was of special interest to me at the time because I was learning all about the importance of the arts on civilizations. But I wondered in my heart who had influenced him and stirred his heart. Well, I happened to be standing in front of one of the bookshelves in my basement and felt drawn to a particular volume of children's stories I had never looked at before. I pulled it off the shelf, and it opened to a page about Pindar. And there I learned there were two women, Clertis and Myrna, two renowned singers who sang songs into his heart as a boy. I was astonished. I never would have found that on my own. I wanted to share the story of Pindar, and I wanted to have an illustration of these two women, and I had done a Google search and had come up empty. As I went to bed, I heard something fall off of my nightstand, so I got down on my hands and knees to see what it was. While I was down there, under my bed, I found an old children's book, among other things, that I forgot I even owned. I picked it up, and the first picture it fell open to was this picture of Pindar as a boy with the two women, Clertis and Myrna. You may call it a coincidence, but coincidences like this happen all the time in my learning. I'm sure many of you have experienced the same thing. The Spirit is very purposeful in its teaching. Each one of us comes into the world with a divine purpose, a special contribution each of us is to make. Only the Spirit can help us navigate the tsunami wave of information we're surrounded by and lead us to the very things which we need to know to accomplish our purpose. There are hidden treasures of knowledge buried all over the world, and the Spirit is waiting for the chance to lead someone who cares enough and is open enough to be led. But look what we're doing. For the first 15 or 20 years of a child's life, every single day, we tell him what he'll learn, what book he will read, what we expect him to get out of it. We ask all the questions and let the child know when we are satisfied that he has learned what we have determined is important for him to know. It's an outside-in model of teaching. What room do we leave for the Spirit to teach? What opportunities do we give our children to be guided in that way? I believe we've got to quit interfering with the Spirit's role as teacher in the lives of our children. Our job is to prepare their hearts, teach them the importance of correct principles, and then get out of the way. All learning under the influence of the Spirit is infinite and eternal. Take away the Spirit and the heart in education, and all that's left is purely academic. I now find this pattern for learning all over the place. Just as a few examples, in our day we were first given the Book of Mormon, primarily a book of stories, starting with the family. Then came the Doctrine and Covenants, a book of laws and principles, and then the temple where spirit-to-spirit learning takes place. I find it in individual scriptures everywhere, even our sacrament prayer, where we are taught to always remember Him, the realm of the imagination, keep His commandments, that we might always have His Spirit to be with us. There was a John the Baptist to stir and prepare the hearts of a people, to receive Jesus and his law of the gospel, which was to prepare them to receive the gift of the Holy Ghost, who would teach them all things that they must do. I find it in history. The Greeks are remembered for their love of art and beauty, the Romans for law and justice, and then came Jesus, teaching of a spiritual kingdom. It's in nature. A seed will lie dormant until the ground warms up. Without a strong root system, the part that is unseen, just like our hearts, the plant will never bear fruit or flower. And it's within the fruit or flower that the seeds are contained by which to multiply and replenish the earth. You may notice that yesterday I tried to plant a seed of desire in your heart so that you would want to know more. Today I'm teaching principles and giving you information, but the most important part will happen after you leave, when the Spirit gives you understanding and helps you apply what you have learned into your life. I could go on all day giving you examples, but I hope you catch the idea. The takeaway here is always tend to the heart before you tend to the mind. This pattern very much applies to the teaching of the new Come Follow Me curriculum. I've noticed how much it's designed around these very principles. Let me recap a few of the things Elder Holland taught. What the Lord is really hoping to change is you and me. He wants to change our hearts. I'm not alone in noticing that we have a heart surgeon leading our church today. The heart is the center of our desires and moves our actions. Change the heart, and you change the world. This kind of learning is too big to fit in a classroom, to be wrapped up in a 45-minute lesson. The everyday curriculum of life itself provides opportunities for us to learn about God, for surely all things bear record of Him. He is willing to teach us anywhere and anytime. Home is classroom and lab, where learning and living the gospel are so seamlessly combined that they are almost indistinguishable. I love all these things he said. There is no separation between temporal and spiritual learning in the Lord's eyes. One thing that means is that your study of history, math, nature, and literature can be a continuation and provide examples of the principles you are learning in Come Follow Me, if you're looking. I notice there are fewer words in the new manuals as compared with older manuals. Mr. Rogers taught us that all true learning happens in the white spaces between the lines, and we've been given a lot of white space. It is purposely designed to allow for adaptation, personalization, and inspiration as to how to best teach your family. And there are many suggestions for incorporating the arts because the arts reach places in our hearts that words alone cannot. I was in Ireland a few weeks ago and we visited the Book of Kells exhibit at Trinity College. I noticed they named the exhibit Turning Darkness into Light. And it struck me, how did they do it? They used colorful art to illuminate the words of the scriptures. The more you apply the arts in your teaching, the more light you will bring. And the way that they made the illumination pop off the page was by the use of layering. We learn line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little and there a little. That's layering. And one day it's like the light goes on. So let me offer some resources and ideas starting with music. A song is a wonderful kind of thing, so lift up your voice and sing. Just start a glad song, let it float, let it ring, and lift up your voice and sing. We shall make music to brighten our day. Music will help us to lighten the way. Lift up your voice, lift up your voice, lift up your voice and sing. A song is a wonderful kind of thing. We shall make music to brighten our day. Music will help us to lighten the way. I hear so many moms say they're sad that they can't afford music lessons for their children. But guess what? Children come equipped with their first and most important instrument, their voices. We've made singing a performing art, and if we can't sing like a performer, we say we can't sing, but it's simply not true. I just demonstrated that you don't even have to sing on key to receive all the benefits. Music is a language all children, even the very youngest, can understand. We are all deeply and profoundly musical. If you don't believe me, try walking to your next class out of rhythm, or try talking out of rhythm. It's nearly impossible. I was thrilled when I saw that sharing time in the new primary program is to be all singing. What other activity can every child participate in at the same time? Voice is the great connector of heart and mind, and the doctrine that our primary songs and hymns will plant in our children's hearts will last a lifetime. Singing these songs, according to the First Presidency preface found in the front of all of our hymn books, will invite the Spirit of the Lord, bring families a spirit of beauty and peace, inspire love and unity among family members, lift our spirits, give us courage, and move us to righteous action. Those are wonderful promises, aren't they? Like I said, movie makers understand the power of music. Musical soundtracks make the sad parts sadder, the happy parts happier, and the scary parts scarier. Hymns and primary songs can provide the soundtrack to gospel doctrine. Especially in childhood, I would rely more on singing than on speaking words. There is a goldmine of primary songs and hymns that go unsung. If you're unfamiliar with them, there's help. If you go to the church website, you'll find accompaniment versions and versions with voices singing. In the primary Come Follow Me manual, you'll find primary song recommendations to go along with the message being taught. I suggest that you don't bog down the process by trying to teach the songs. Just sing them, and your children will easily learn by repetition. And then sing them as you work, as you play, as you travel together, or as lullabies, as is recommended in the preface of the hymn book. And if you want to tie it into any nations you might be studying, you'll find versions in many languages in the church website. If you notice up there in the right corner where it says English, that's actually a drop-down menu that when you click on it, it will bring up a whole variety of languages from all over the world. Let's choose French. Here's I'm a Child of God in French. You can print the words out. You'll notice also that you have the song sung in French if you don't know how to pronounce the words. That's not true for all the languages. Many of the Spanish, French, and Portuguese versions have audio recordings that go along with it. But for other languages, you'll have to find another way to get pronunciation. Maybe some returned missionaries or online has some wonderful pronunciation guides to it. Isn't this part of the spirit of gathering when you realize that children all over the whole world are singing the same songs? And what a great introduction to foreign languages, and for children to hear the music of these different languages. Don't overlook all the wonderful songs in the music library. There are sing-along songs. There's simplified piano music for young musicians to play, songs with American Sign Language. You can find music from The Friend. Lots of wonderful songs in The Friend that we rarely sing. The downside to these songs is that most of them don't have recordings, and so if you don't play the piano or if you can't read music, it might be hard to figure out how they're supposed to sound, but I bet you know someone who can help you out with that. The other thing I mentioned yesterday is that the great composers like Handel and Brahms and Bach have gifted us music that was intended to purify us and lift us closer to heaven. But for many of our youth, this language of music is too rich for their tastes. The strong, repetitive beat of popular music is deadening their sensitivities. My Heart Educator friends addressed this issue. What did they recommend? Basically, it was follow the pattern for learning by first focusing on the melody, which is like the heart of a song. Let your children hum along or draw a pitch melody in the air with their hands, or let them try and find the melody in the piano keys. Then let them feel the rhythm. The rhythm of music maintains order. Let them sway to it or dance to it. And then quite naturally they will start to feel the beautiful harmonies layered around it. There are some wonderful music books in the Mother's University that will fully guide you through this process. The other recommendation was that if you want children to appreciate fine music, you need to make the unfamiliar become familiar. The more you play fine music in your home, the more friendly it will feel. How do you kill a love of music? Start with notation and technical drills, the realm of the mind, which has convinced more people that they are not musical than just about anything else. Every single person is deeply musical. And as Martin Luther said, music is the art of the prophets and the only art that can calm the agitations of the soul. It is one of the most magnificent and delightful presents God has given us. So lift up your voice and sing. Let's turn to the second language, imagery. A young father in our ward was telling me that they keep their Come Follow Me manual in a cubby in their couch. And every night when he says, "Who wants to do Come Follow Me?" his little kids come running in. "What picture are we on tonight, Daddy?" Children love pictures because it's a language they understand. And the images will remain on their hearts for a very long time, maybe even forever. I love that the primary manuals and the home manuals now include a lot of fine art. This dad said that when the kids open up the manual, he uses the pictures to tell a story, or he has his kids tell the story of what they're seeing. A lesson can be as simple as that. There are also great truths and principles buried in much of the fine art of the world, and you certainly don't need to limit their exposure to just religious paintings. Let's take a look at an example. This is a painting by the German artist von Bremen. Now, go ahead, look really, really hard at this painting. Are you looking? Look harder. Is that helpful? Let me offer 3 tools that I learned from John Muir-Laws, who teaches workshops on nature journaling, and for the purpose of opening our eyes to see more in nature. When I started applying the 3 tools to fine arts, I started discovering all kinds of details in the paintings I had previously missed. The 3 tools are simple. I notice, I wonder, and that reminds me of. Let's go back to the painting and apply them. I notice there's a kind of light that seems to be shining from the book into the faces of the children who are looking at it. I wonder if it's a Bible. It looks like one, and the light reminds me that the Word is a lamp unto my feet, a light in my life. I notice how the brother has his arm around his sister, how comfortable they seem around each other, how much they must love each other. I notice the brother is so engaged in what they're reading, he has put his piece of bread down on the floor. It reminds me that the word of the Lord is often referred to as the bread of life, and he who eats of this bread will never hunger again. I notice that they don't appear to be rich, at least materially. Their home is simply furnished. The children are sitting on the floor. But I notice the look of contentment on the mother's face. I notice she has an appreciation for beauty. She's taken the time to grow roses on her windowsill, and I wonder if she's the one who has painted the roses on her cabinet. I also notice the letter on the windowsill with the rose by it. I notice whoever gave it to her must know of her love for roses. It's the perfect gift. I wonder if the letter is from her husband. I wonder if he's away from home. Is he a soldier? Does he travel for work? Or is he just thoughtful and has given her a love letter that has made her smile with contentment? Of course, I notice the books overhead, and I notice the open window. I can almost feel the fresh breezes blowing through, and I notice in the center of the window, and really the central part of the painting, a chapel. It reminds me of how faith is the center of my soul and my life. I notice the spinning wheel in front of the mother. There's work to be done. There is always work to be done. But it reminds me of those rare moments when I pause and just feel contentment in the moment for life and reflect on my blessings and the goodness of home and family and everything that really matters. I notice the heart in the chair where she sits. I believe love is the foundation of that home. Now, I have no idea if the artist intended these things, but these are the things I noticed and connected to, and it makes me love this painting. And as I take the time to notice and wonder, it's as though each detail of the painting is etched on the wall of the gallery in my own heart, and I can close my eyes and see the painting and feel all the feelings associated with it, and it makes me happy. Did you notice how many gospel principles this painting is teaching? As you do this picture talk with your children, it will help to bring paintings to life for them, and in time they'll start discovering principles to apply in their own lives, for themselves. Just be careful to not kill it by making it a chore or an assignment. And please, you wouldn't assign them to write an essay on it, would you? If you're looking for pictures like the ones I showed you in yesterday's presentation, I've been collecting them. These are wonderful to begin with because to awaken a love of fine art, you have to first connect your children to a subject that's familiar to them. So I look for paintings of children and animals and flowers and families and home. To go to my collection, the most direct way is to visit welleducatedheart.com, and in the search field at the bottom of any page, enter Art, Home, and Family, and it will take you to a page that looks like this. Each of these open to a Pinterest page of art images that you can print out and display any way you'd like. If you hang around my website, I'll connect you with what I'm finding as well as a lot of other art resources to help your children appreciate fine art. Another suggested activity you will frequently find in the new Come Follow Me manual is drawing. Drawing produces an exactness of thought. It doesn't matter if the drawings are perfectly sketched. In the attempt to recreate what you are seeing, it helps the heart to process the lesson. Little children don't have our adult inhibitions and are very creative in expressing themselves through illustrating what they're learning. So give them a chance. And by the way, everyone can learn to draw. It's a skill that's been sorely neglected, and consequently we see much less than we could. Nature journaling is a perfect way to acquire the skill, and God has hidden so many teachings and truths that are revealed as we sketch. If you go to John Muir Laws, you'll find a lot that will inspire and teach you about nature journaling, and he gives a lot of free instruction in how to draw. I hosted Jack at a couple of workshops last year, and he is a living testament of the power of sketching as a means of learning. By the way, he is profoundly dyslexic. He grew up thinking he was stupid until a high school teacher opened another door for him, and he uses pictures to learn. He earned graduate degrees by listening rather than reading, and the thing I noticed about him that is so remarkable is his power of memory. He can't rely on the written word, so he has to remember things. But it's hardly a handicap. If anything, I think he sees things much more deeply than those of us who rely so heavily on written words. Poetry. A poet can capture a profound truth in just a few words, and the poems we take the time to memorize will teach us throughout our lives. Poetry can be like jewels in our lives. They can sweeten the most painful of experiences. Is anything more painful than that separation of death? I was recently reading a brief biography of one of my heart educator friends, Jane Taylor. She had a little school in her home and was beloved for her storytelling. When she became very ill and the doctors said she had just hours left, she had arranged that this poem be read to family and friends who had gathered to say goodbye. Prepare the house, kind friends. Drape it and deck it with leaves and blossoms fair. Throw open doors and windows and call hither the sunshine and soft air. Let all the house, from floor to ceiling, look its noblest and its best, for it may chance that soon may come to me a most imperial guest. A prouder visitor than ever yet has crossed my threshold o'er. One wearing a royal scepter and a crown shall enter at my door. Shall deign perchance sit at my board an hour and break with me my bread. Suffer perchance this night my honored roof shelter his kingly head. And if ere comes the sun again, he bid me arise without delay, and follow him a journey to his kingdom, unknown and far away. And in the gray light of the dawning morn we pass out from my door, my guest and I, silent, without farewell, and to return no more. Weep not, kind friends, I pray, not with vain tears let your glad eyes grow dim. Remember that my house was all prepared, and that I welcomed him. Isn't that beautiful? I can tell you how to kill a love of poetry in your children. Make sure you assign them a poem that you've decided is important they learn. Have them look up all the vocabulary words they don't know, and bonus points if you make them create sentences demonstrating they can use the word correctly. Have them analyze the poem, identifying its meter and rhyme. Request they place appropriate accent marks, and then do assign them to write an essay on the meaning of the poem. I hope your school experience was different than mine. It took me decades to make friends with poetry again, but now I love it. It was my heart educator friends who helped me. This is their simple method for helping children love poetry. First step, fall in love with poetry yourself. Step 2, read it aloud. Poetry's not meant to be read silently to yourself. Your voice brings the music. So fill their ears with Mother Goose rhymes when they're babies and toddlers. If you want your children to love Homer when they're older, give them Mother Goose when they're babies. Nursery rhymes have a tremendous ordering effect on young brains. Recognize that your little children are not listening for meaning. They are listening to the music, and children have a natural love for it. So don't be afraid to read to them that which is way over their heads. Then start gathering the poetry that makes your heart sing into a personal anthology. I picked up a blank journal at the craft store, and every time I come across a poem that stirs my heart, I copy it in my poetry book. Let your children see you doing this and share your favorites with them. When they're ready, buy them a blank journal for them to start gathering their own favorites. If they're not yet writing, you can copy the poems of their choice for them, and then let them illustrate or put designs on the page, make it colorful. This first book of poetry can become their first reading book. You can have them practice handwriting by copying sentences that don't mean anything to them, or you can let them practice by copying poems they love into their very own book of favorite poetry. Collect worthy and beautiful books of poetry that you keep on a shelf that's easily accessible. And many families are regularly having poetry tea times where they come together and share the poems they've found that they love or are memorizing. Of course, don't forget the cookies and hot chocolate. So do use poetry to enhance and deepen the lessons in the Come Follow Me manual. Here are a few of my favorite poetry collections. This first book, Best Loved Poems of the LDS People, is out of print, but I regularly find copies at DI, or you can look for used copies online. These are not necessarily written by LDS people, but the majority are poems that were quoted in General Conference. By the way, did you know President David O. McKay was said to have memorized over 1,000 poems? I like this book because the poems are sorted by topics that will make it easy for you to find something that will tie into the lesson that you're giving. For a general poetry collection that's still in print, check out Favorite Poems, Old and New, originally published in 1957 by Helen Ferris, Ferris. Or another favorite is The Golden Treasury of Poetry, selected by Louis Untermeyer, illustrated by Joan Walsh England. It's no longer in print, but there are quite a few used copies running around out there. Another book that is out of print, but which there are usually quite a few used copies online, is Christ in the Fine Arts. It not only contains poetry, but also fine art, hymns, and stories. It was compiled for young people because the compiler realized that it's through the arts that young people will best come to know and love their Savior. She also has a book for the Old Testament. I love this book so much, and it will work so nicely with Come Follow Me. Back in the early 60s when I was a little girl, one of the Relief Society lessons was called Cultural Refinement, and they used as their text a series of 5 books called Out of the Best Books. If you would like to deepen your appreciation for poetry and all the arts, this is a great self-instructive collection. I've learned so much, and it's sorted by topics like faith in God and man, the place of suffering in man, refinement creates beauty, humility yields strength, virtue nourishes the soul. So you can see you can easily find selections that can tie into your Come Follow Me topics. I don't see many used copies online, but I see them at DI all the time. Or ask your mothers or grandmothers or older women in your ward if they would be willing to part with their copies. One more poetry resource. If you go to welleducatedheart.com and select categories in the search bar, go to the Others section and you will find a link to a lot of older poetry books. Just click on the little heart and it will open up a free digital copy of the books, and that will give you a lot to go on. And now, story. I remember a Christmas several years ago. We have a large family, so Christmas was always stressful. But this particular day, it seems I was in charge of some ward event or something, and I was really feeling crunched for time. I pulled into a gas station, and when I put my credit card in at the pump, it said I had to go into the store, which really irritated me. I was very indignant, and I made sure the clerk knew it. What kind of a gas station is this that the pumps won't read the cards? I paid and went back out, pumped the gas, and drove off. And then came that still small voice. Marlene, you know that clerk didn't deserve that. That is hardly the Christmas spirit, and I felt really badly. So I turned the car around, went to the grocery store and bought a big bag of Christmas candy, went back to the gas station and found the clerk. I looked him in the eyes and I said, "You didn't deserve to be treated like that, and I am so sorry. Please forgive me. I hope you have a Merry Christmas," and I handed him the bag of candy. I have no idea what he thought. He might have thought I was crazy, but I know how I felt. You can explain the steps of repentance, or you can show it in action, which a story does. It's the story that makes the heart desire it. Your personal stories of answered prayers and rewarded faith will carry much more deeply than explanations. Phrases like applying the atonement and walking the covenant path are hard for the heart to wrap around without a story to illustrate. Many years ago when my children were small, I served as the stake primary president in a stake that had lots of young families. There were 12 wards in our stake, and it was common for nurseries to have 75 or more children. Elder Neil Maxwell came to visit one time, and a few days later he was performing a sealing in the temple. He didn't know that a member of our stake was in the group that he was chatting with when he said, "I visited a stake a couple of days ago that was so loud and noisy you could have fired a cannon and no one would have heard it." It was no surprise that the stake president came to me and asked if I would organize a primary for the kids the next stake conference, which was a bit of a logistical challenge, but we did it. We had the kids rotate rooms, and in one of the rooms I had them show a video. It was Easter Sunday, so I thought it would be appropriate to show the Easter story from the church's children's scripture stories. Pretty soon one of my counselors came running to find me. "Sister Peterson, we can't show that video to those little children. It's too sad." It is sad, and that's exactly why we do show it to our little children. I don't remember a lot about being 3 years old, but I remember hearing the story of Jesus on the cross. That single story bound my heart to his in a way that has lasted my entire life. In fact, that is the point of the story, to draw all men unto them. It stirs our deepest sympathies and helps us to love him. The first commandment is not to obey. The first commandment is to love, which is the first step in the pattern. If we teach our children to obey the commandments, but they never feel that personal love and connection to the Savior, they are as the Pharisees and scribes who prided themselves on perfect adherence to the law, but there was no love for the Lord, or really anyone else in their hearts. They didn't need a Savior. They were perfecting themselves. On the other hand, if we teach them to love, but not to obey, they are as the hypocrites to whom Jesus said, "Why call me Lord, Lord, and do not what I say?" And in either case, the Spirit will not be manifested in their lives. Here is the pattern again. If ye love me, keep my commandments, and I will pray the Father send you another Comforter, the Spirit of truth. First, we love. And to teach our children to love, we need to share lots of stories and pictures to bring Jesus to life in their hearts. They need to feel a personal connection. My patriarchal blessing tells me how varied my children would be in dispositions, abilities, objectives, purposes, and callings. The only requirement placed on me was to teach them to know and to love the Lord. Everything grows out of that love. I wish I had known the things I'm teaching you while my children were growing up. Attach their hearts to His, and they will grow up wanting to be near Him and to be like Him. So many things we stress about, teaching them somehow resolve themselves in this love. Did you see President Nelson's counsel to the Samoans? There are difficult days ahead. Please protect your families. Please protect your children. Help them to know the Lord and love Him and keep His commandments. The lesson about the crucifixion is coming up in a few weeks. I challenge you to put the book down and tell the story from your heart. In fact, try to tell all the stories of Jesus by heart and experience for yourselves the difference it makes. Here's the story filtered through my own heart. Yours will be different, and you'll adapt it to the ages of the children you're telling it to. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning when the Roman soldiers drove large nails through the hands and feet of Jesus, fastening his body to wooden beams. Jesus had not slept all night. He had been dragged from ruler to ruler, his hands bound behind his back. He had been mocked, insulted, spat upon, even cruelly whipped. His accusers had to work quickly in the dark of the night. They had seen how all those adoring crowds of followers had welcomed Jesus a few days earlier as their king. What they were to do must be done while those who loved Jesus slept, or they might interfere with their plans. And now, in these early morning hours when few knew what was happening, his cross was lifted between two thieves just outside the city gates, and there he was to hang until he died. And yet, even in his agony, his thoughts were turned to others. He could hear the Roman soldiers passing the time laughing, joking, gambling for his robe. To them he offered forgiveness. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." To the thief beside him he offered hope. "Today you shall be with me in paradise." To his grieving and heartbroken mother, Mary, who was close enough that he could speak to her, he gave comfort. "John, please, take my mother to your home and care for her." Forgiveness, hope, and comfort, the same gifts he offers to us still. By noon, thick, black clouds blocked the sun, casting an eerie darkness over the scene. Rumbles of thunder could be heard, flashes of lightning. The winds began to blow. Pilate insisted a sign be nailed to the top of the cross. It read, "King of the Jews," in 3 different languages. A crown of thorns remained pressed into his head. Passers-by scornfully wagged their finger at him. "If you are who you say you are, come down from the cross, and then we'll believe you," and laughing moved on. Jesus made no reply. His disciples, when word came to them, rushed to the site in confusion, bewilderment, disbelief, profound sorrow. How could this be happening? The kingdom has not been established. There's still so much to be done. Surely some miracle will deliver him. He can't leave us now. A ladder was brought nearby, along with linens to wrap his body. All things must be ready. It would go against their strict Jewish laws to lay him in the tomb after the sun had set and the Sabbath had begun. 1 o'clock. 2 o'clock. Still he suffers in silence. As excruciating as the physical pain had been, Jesus now feels a much deeper pain. My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" He has now hung on the cross for nearly 6 hours, when for the first time he asks something for himself. "I thirst." Twice before he's been offered wine, but he's refused it. The first time it was to be mixed with a drug to lessen his pain. But now he accepts the wine-soaked sponge that is lifted to his parched lips and dry throat, and then, with a loud voice, cries out, "It is finished. Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit." It shouldn't be hard to sit very still and think about Jesus, his cross on the hill, and all that he suffered and did for me. It shouldn't be hard to sit quietly. It shouldn't be hard, even though I am small, to think always of Jesus, not hard at all. Then let silence be the teacher. Don't be too quick to start talking and interpreting. If there are questions or comments, let them rise up out of your children's hearts and go from there. By the way, this is Carl Bloch's painting included in the lesson manual. You'll notice I wove elements of the painting into the story I told. I probably wouldn't show the picture during the story because I want the listener to paint the images on his own heart first. The painting is just a reinforcer. Do take your classrooms out under the stars or under the trees as often as you can, especially when you're telling stories. Elder Eyring's son said one of his favorite classrooms was on the sandy beach of Baja, California, where with the rhythmic rolling of the waves in the background and the sky and the song of birds overhead, his mother read pages of great literature to her family. Keep in mind, most of the words you speak will likely be forgotten, but what your children will remember is how they felt when they were near you, what home felt like. In the Teaching in the Savior's Way manual it says, the Savior's power to teach and lift others came from the kind of person he was. You are the most important lesson. Your children are watching you. One of my favorite great soul friends is John G. Paton, a Scottish Presbyterian missionary who felt the call to share the love of Jesus Christ with the cannibals of the New Hebrides Islands. He wasn't deterred by the stories of missionaries who were killed and all the dangers he would be facing. He had a deep and abiding faith, and what he accomplished with God's help is miraculous. Where did that kind of faith come from? He leaves us a little glimpse in his description of his home-centered gospel learning. Let's join him on a tour of his home. The closet was a very small apartment. This was the sanctuary of that cottage home. Thither daily and oftentimes a day, generally after each meal, we saw our father retire and shut to the door, and we children got to understand by a sort of spiritual instinct, for the thing was too sacred to be talked about, that prayers were being poured out there for us, as of old by the high priest within the veil in the most holy place. We occasionally heard the pathetic echoes of a trembling voice pleading as if for life, and we learned to slip out and in past that door on tiptoe, not to disturb the holy colloquy. The outside world might not know, but we knew whence came that happy light as of a newborn smile that always was dawning on my father's face. It was a reflection from the divine presence, in the consciousness of which he lived. Never in temple or cathedral, on mountain or in glen, can I hope to feel that the Lord God is more near, more visibly walking and talking with men, than under that humble cottage roof of thatch and oaken wattles. Though everything else in religion were by some unthinkable catastrophe to be swept out of memory or blotted from my understanding, my soul would wander back to those early scenes and shut itself up once again in that sanctuary closet, and hearing still the echoes of those cries to God, would hurl back all doubt with the victorious appeal, "He walked with God. Why may not I?" Continuing, each of us from very early days considered it no penalty, but a great joy to walk with our Father to the church. The 4 miles were a treat to our young spirits. The company by the way was a fresh incitement. Oh, I can remember those happy Sabbath evenings, a holy, happy, entirely human day for a Christian father, mother, and children to spend. There were 11 of us brought up in a home like that, and never one of the 11, boy or girl, man or woman, has been heard or ever will be heard saying that Sabbath was dull and wearisome for us. But God help the homes where these things are done by force and not by love. I hope I've given you some useful ideas, as I've spent much more time in all the arts, carefully watching for principles of truth in them and applying them. I have felt such an increase of light and joy in my own life. And I receive letters almost every day from moms telling me how applying this pattern for learning is changing the lives of their families and the spirit of their homes. Our time is up, but I want to close with a song that I heard late one night that captures the spirit of this message I'm trying to deliver. The song was commissioned by the church to accompany the placement of this sculpture just in front of the church office building. I spoke with the composer's widow, and she told me about her husband, who, by profession, composed the soundtracks to several Disney movies. She said a turning point in his career was when he learned to listen to the melody that poured out of his heart, rather than focusing so hard on trying to fit the music to the time frames of the film. Heart and melody first. This song is like a sweet lullaby, and I have a feeling you'll be carrying it around with you. Encircle your children with love.
Encircle the child with his tiny, still pliable, pure from above. Surround him with truth and with virtue. Create for him circles of love. Encircle the child with the knowledge of all he has known truth is eternal and endless. Create in him worlds to explore. Encircle the child with affection, the warmth of a heartfelt concern, for caring enforces the teaching. Love opens desires to learn. Encircle him firmly with kindness, with patience, with listening, with trust. Encourage his reaching and growing. Be full of compassion, be just. Encircle the child while he's tiny, still pliable, pure from above. Surround him with truth and with virtue. Create for himself